So today, I'll take you through 10 countries that prosper only because of Filipinos. This isn't just global politics, this is personal. The story of Filipinos overseas is really about what happens when the world underestimates people like you and me. Stay with me because each country reveals a shocking truth, and by the time we reach the last one, you'll understand why the phrase Filipino people carries more power than most politicians want to admit. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments and I'll give you a heart. 10. Saudi Arabia. And for decades, Saudi Arabia's hospitals weren't just powered by machines, they were powered by people, specifically by the expertise, compassion, and tireless work of Filipino nurses, caregivers, and medical technicians. They were the silent, indispensable backbone of the kingdom's entire healthcare system, running the hospitals, caring for the sick, and handling the daily miracles that keep a nation healthy. But in 2011, the Saudi government thought they could easily replace them. They believed their own citizens, through a new policy called Saudization, could fill the massive gap. It sounded logical on paper: reduce dependency on foreign workers and create jobs for locals. The plan was simple and the leadership was confident. They thought this would be an easy transition. They were wrong. So incredibly, catastrophically wrong. Within months, the country's healthcare system faced total chaos. Hospitals were hit with severe staff shortages. Patients who once received world-class care suddenly had to wait for hours just to be seen. The quality of care plummeted and patient outcomes declined. What was once a source of national pride became a national embarrassment. Imagine walking into an emergency room during a medical crisis where the staff is overwhelmed, undertrained, and unprepared to handle the flood of patients. That was the grim reality in many Saudi hospitals. Families openly complained, and stories of neglect spread like wildfire. The system wasn't just struggling, it was flatlining. The Saudi government was in a bind. Their grand plan had backfired spectacularly, and the global reputation of their healthcare system was taking a massive hit. It didn't take long for them to realize their mistake. They had no choice but to quietly and desperately beg thousands of Filipinos to return. They offered better salaries and more benefits, admitting what they once denied. Without Filipinos, their entire healthcare infrastructure was at risk of collapse. Today, Saudi Arabia's healthcare system is once again back on its feet, largely thanks to the return of these skilled professionals. This crisis proved a powerful lesson. You can have all the oil money and modern buildings in the world, but without the right people, the system falls apart. So I have to ask you, if Saudi Arabia, a country with more wealth than most can imagine, could not function without Filipinos, what chance does your country have? Comment below and tell me your thoughts. We'll be reading every single one. Now that we've seen how quickly one of the wealthiest nations on earth struggled without this crucial workforce, you have to be wondering what happened in other countries that made the same mistake. And believe me, the consequences were just as shocking. Stick around because next we're going to dive into what happened when a small island nation made a similar blunder. But first, if you're finding this deep dive fascinating, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep digging into these stories. 9. Kuwait. Tensions between Kuwait and the Philippines exploded after a horrifying series of reports surfaced detailing abuse and even the deaths of Filipino domestic workers. The Filipino government, under immense public pressure, had no choice but to take a stand. They pulled back their citizens in a bold, unprecedented move. Kuwait's leadership, however, simply shrugged it off. Their attitude was, fine, we'll just hire others. They were confident they could easily replace the tens of thousands of skilled workers they had just lost. But what followed was a real-world disaster. The country quickly devolved into chaos. Families accustomed to having reliable, trustworthy domestic help couldn't find anyone to take their place. The replacements they did find often lacked the professionalism, dedication, and genuine care that Filipinos had provided for years. Daily life became an unpredictable struggle for thousands of Kuwaiti families. But the problems went far beyond the household. The labor ban sent shockwaves through Kuwait's economy. Hospitals were suddenly critically understaffed, with a severe shortage of skilled nurses and medical professionals. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a matter of life and death. Essential jobs in construction and engineering also went unfilled, causing major projects to stall and the economy to slow down. The entire country was feeling the squeeze. The pressure mounted day by day, and by 2020, it was unbearable. Businesses were losing money and families were desperate. The public outcry was so loud that the Kuwaiti government had no choice but to bow to the pressure. They were forced to sign a new, comprehensive agreement with the Philippines, making a desperate plea to bring the workers back. This wasn't a negotiation of equals, it was a climb down. Kuwait had to accept the terms that the Philippines had set out to protect their citizens. And here's where it gets even more profound, even worse. In the aftermath of the crisis, many families and businesses publicly admitted something they would have never said before. No other nationality provided the same loyalty, skill, and trust. The truth was clear to everyone. Kuwait's daily life and its very economy run on the shoulders of the Filipino people. Their work ethic and compassionate nature are simply irreplaceable. By the way, if you're finding this eye-opening so far, do me a favor and hit that like button. Your one click helps this video beat the algorithm and ensures more people see the truth that mainstream media often ignores. 8. Qatar. From the moment you stepped into a luxury hotel lobby to the time you boarded one of their world-class airlines, the standard of service was defined by one group of people, Filipinos. They were the engine room, the compassionate heart, and the smiling face of the nation's entire hospitality industry. Their quiet professionalism and dedication made Qatar's reputation for excellence a global reality. Then, in 2017, everything changed. A massive regional diplomatic crisis erupted, and as a result, many Filipinos were suddenly caught in the middle. Visa renewals were denied, and thousands were forced to leave the country. Qatar's leadership, convinced that a simple policy change could fix the problem, thought others could fill the gap, but they were dangerously mistaken. What followed was a slow-motion catastrophe. Service standards collapsed in hotels and restaurants. The polished experience that tourists and business travelers expected was replaced by delays, disorganized staff, and a noticeable drop in quality. Guests started complaining about everything from unserviced rooms to poor customer service. At a time when Qatar was trying to build its brand as a global destination, little did they know the nation's entire reputation, its hard-won brand of excellence, was suddenly on the line. But the clock was ticking. By 2019, with the global scrutiny of the impending World Cup looming, Qatar's leaders realized their mistake. They didn't just make a policy adjustment, they went on a full-scale campaign to lure Filipinos back. They offered higher salaries, better benefits, and a promise of stability because they had learned a powerful, unassailable truth. You can build magnificent towers and you can buy the most luxurious furnishings, but you cannot buy the dedication, the professionalism, and the heart that Filipinos bring to their work. This humbling reality forced a wealthy nation to admit its reliance on a workforce it had once taken for granted. And it proved that without a specific kind of human touch, even the most expensive brand in the world can fall apart. But wait until we get to Japan, where one single test nearly destroyed elderly care and changed a nation's perspective forever. 7. United Arab Emirates. Think about Dubai's skyline, the Burj Khalifa, the luxury malls, the futuristic airports. It's a landscape that screams wealth and ambition. But who do you think built all of that? And who do you think serves in those 5-star hotels, runs the hospitals, and keeps those sprawling malls humming with life? The answer is simple: Filipinos. They are the unseen backbone of the entire United Arab Emirates, a force of 1 million+ people that makes the country's futuristic vision a reality. But in 2020, during the global pandemic, the illusion cracked wide open. The UAE, in an attempt to control the crisis, suspended thousands of work permits. A huge percentage of their Filipino workforce was suddenly forced to leave. The government thought, like so many others, that they could manage. They couldn't have been more wrong. Almost overnight, the country's massive engine began to seize up. Construction sites went eerily quiet, with cranes sitting idle against the desert sun. Hotels, once bustling with tourists and business travelers, were left with no staff to clean the rooms or run the restaurants. Even the healthcare system, already under immense pressure from the pandemic, faced dangerous shortages of nurses and medical professionals. The entire tourism industry, a key pillar of the economy, dropped like a rock, and the nation's ambitious projects ground to a halt. By 2022, the reality was impossible to ignore. The UAE's leadership knew they were in trouble. The vision of a vibrant future city was starting to look more like a ghost town, a monument to a dream that had lost its momentum. They had no choice but to reverse course. They began an aggressive campaign to lure Filipinos back, offering better salaries, more benefits, and a promise of stability. The UAE's crisis was a humbling admission. You can have all the wealth in the world, you can build the tallest buildings and the most luxurious resorts, but without the right people, the entire system is just a beautiful facade. The country now openly depends on the Filipinos it once took for granted. If you've ever visited Dubai or Abu Dhabi, tell me in the comments, could you even imagine those places running without Filipino? I'm honestly curious what you think. 6. Malaysia. Malaysia once prided itself on having a booming tourism sector with a reputation for smooth, efficient, and welcoming service. From the vibrant street food stalls to the upscale hotels, the service industry was a cornerstone of the economy, and a massive part of that success was due to the professionalism and hard work of the Filipino workforce. They were the ones who kept the hotels pristine, the restaurants bustling, and the airports moving smoothly. But then in 2016, the Malaysian government made a critical miscalculation. They implemented a series of new, stricter labor laws designed to reduce the country's dependency on foreign workers and encourage local hiring. The result was a dramatic exodus of thousands of skilled Filipino workers who were forced out or chose to leave due to the new, challenging regulations. Within months, the ripple effect was devastating. Service quality across the board plummeted. Tourists who had come to expect a certain standard left angry reviews on travel sites. Locals complained about disorganized businesses and a noticeable lack of the courteous service they had grown used to. Hospitality businesses, from small cafes to international hotel chains, were in a full-blown panic. They couldn't find workers who could replicate the unique blend of skill, warmth, and professionalism that the Filipinos provided. The crisis continued to build for years. By 2019, the pressure from the private sector and the hit to Malaysia's international reputation became too much to bear. The government was forced to quietly reverse course. They reopened their doors, but this time they had to sweeten the deal. They begged the Filipino workers to come back, offering not just a job, but better pay and conditions. The truth was laid bare for all to see. Malaysia learned that while anyone can be trained to serve a customer, not everyone can serve with the same heart, grace, and professionalism that the Filipinos bring to the job. It's a level of dedication and care that you can't teach in a training manual, and without it, the entire industry lost its soul. Now that was just the beginning. If a huge tourist economy can crumble so fast, what happens when a country's very social fabric is at risk? We're about to find out, because we're headed to Japan, where one single language test nearly destroyed elderly care for an entire nation. 5. Japan. Japan faces a generational problem unlike any other. A rapidly aging population with more senior citizens than ever and fewer young people to care for them. For years, the Filipino workforce was the quiet, compassionate lifeline to the elderly. They brought not just skill, but a deep sense of respect and empathy to a demanding job. Making sure Japan's grandparents were cared for with dignity, they were the heart of the nation's care homes and a source of comfort for thousands of families. We actually described, nasty mistake, for ages and ages, but dropout rates were staggering. But in 2010, the Japanese government made a decision that sent shockwaves through the system. They imposed new, incredibly strict rules, forcing foreign caregivers to pass an almost impossible, high-level Japanese language proficiency test. On the surface, it sounded like a way to ensure quality, but in reality, it was an impenetrable barrier. The result was a devastating human-scale crisis. Thousands of dedicated Filipinos who had been ready to work were blocked from entering the country. The lack of qualified caregivers became a national emergency. Nursing homes were dangerously understaffed and overcrowded. Families watched helplessly as their elderly relatives who needed constant attention suffered from a lack of proper care. It wasn't just a labor shortage. It was a breakdown of the social fabric. The outcry from families and local communities was overwhelming. By 2018, the government had no choice but to reverse course. They finally eased the rules, recognizing that the human need for care was more important than a rigid bureaucratic test. Today, Filipinos are back, and they are quietly saving Japan's elderly population one person at a time. The country learned a painful lesson. The unique blend of compassion and professionalism that the Filipino people bring is not something you can quantify or test for. The next time someone talks about the future of a country's social system, you'll know the real story. And what's about to be revealed next is even more shocking. If you're watching from Japan right now, type respect in the comments, because you, more than anyone, already know how much your grandparents depend on the hardworking, compassionate Filipinos who care for them. 4. Singapore. Singapore has built its global reputation on one thing above all else: efficiency. A gleaming, orderly, and highly functional society. But that efficiency wasn't just a result of smart policies and cutting-edge technology, it was powered by a massive and largely unseen workforce, a huge portion of which were Filipinos. They were the domestic helpers who kept households running smoothly, the dedicated nurses who kept the healthcare system operating like a well-oiled machine, and the countless service staff who ensured every transaction was seamless. They were the key to the nation's legendary productivity, the quiet force behind its success. Then came 2020. The world went on lockdown and Singapore's famously tight borders shut overnight. Thousands of Filipinos who were visiting home or stuck abroad found themselves unable to return. The city-state's perfect facade started to crack. Households that relied on trusted helpers to care for their children and elderly parents were suddenly thrown into chaos. It was a crisis on a personal, family-by-family level. Parents had to juggle remote work with childcare, and elderly residents lost their trusted companions and caregivers. The delicate balance of daily life was shattered. At the same time, the nation's celebrated healthcare system was facing dangerous staff shortages, just as it needed every single person on deck to fight a global pandemic. Hospitals scrambled to fill the void left by Filipino nurses, but the specialized skill and dedication they provided were impossible to replace overnight. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a matter of national security. The system was at a breaking point, its famed efficiency a distant memory. Singapore's government, known for its decisive and swift action, had to confront a brutal truth. By late 2021, they launched a series of policies to fast-track the return of Filipino workers. They understood that their meticulously planned system couldn't function without the human capital that drove it. Efficiency is just a word on a government report until you remove the very people who make it happen on the ground every single day. The crisis was a painful wake-up call that a well-oiled machine is nothing without the right people to run it. The return of the Filipino workforce wasn't just a political decision, it was a desperate move to restore the very foundation of their society. The nation learned the hard way that a strong economy and a stable society are built not just on infrastructure, but on the trust and reliance of the people who power it. But what happened in Hong Kong proved something even bigger. Not only do Filipinos fill essential jobs, they hold families together. And when they're gone, life falls apart. 3. South Korea. South Korea, the land of Samsung, Hyundai, and some of the most innovative technology on the planet. Its global success is built on a foundation of massive factories, precision manufacturing, and relentless productivity. But behind that shiny tech and those fast-moving assembly lines, there is a quiet, essential force. Thousands of Filipinos who filled critical roles in manufacturing, tech, and heavy industries. And they were the skilled hands and dedicated workers that kept the country's economic engine running at full speed. But in the early 2010s, with a strong focus on boosting their local workforce, the South Korean government made a critical miscalculation. They believed they could reduce their dependence on foreign workers. Visa restrictions for Filipinos were tightened, making it incredibly difficult for them to come to the country or renew their permits. As a result, thousands left, and the once smooth operations of South Korea's industrial sector began to grind to a halt. The consequences were immediate and severe. Factories slowed down, unable to find skilled and reliable replacements. Production targets were missed. Global competitiveness, which is the very lifeblood of South Korea's export-driven economy, started to slip. Companies that had once prided themselves on efficiency and speed were now facing delays and a crisis in productivity. This wasn't just a minor setback. It was a serious threat to the nation's standing as a global industrial powerhouse. By 2016, South Korean leaders realized the true extent of the damage. The experiment had failed. They had no choice but to change their policies. They reopened visas specifically for Filipinos, recognizing that their unique work ethic and specialized skills were irreplaceable. The government understood that without them, South Korea's crucial edge in global competition was gone, and their industries would continue to suffer. The return of the Filipino workforce was a lifeline, and it proved that a country's economic strength is not just about its brand, but about the people who make its products. But if factories collapsing is bad, wait until you see what happened in Italy, where thousands of elderly people were left completely helpless. This next story is about the human cost of a similar mistake, and it's a gut punch you won't forget. 2. Canada. Now let's cross the Atlantic and turn our attention to Canada, the nation is globally renowned for having one of the most respected and comprehensive healthcare systems in the world. But here's a hidden truth most people don't know. The system only runs smoothly, effectively, and with the compassionate care that it's known for because of the unwavering dedication of Filipino nurses. They have been the quiet, professional backbone of Canadian healthcare for decades. But in the early 2000s, Canada, like many other nations, made a critical mistake. The government tightened its immigration policies and implemented new, stricter rules that made it incredibly difficult for Filipinos to enter the country. The result was an immediate and catastrophic shortage of skilled nursing staff. What followed was a slow-motion disaster. Hospitals were critically understaffed, wait times for emergency care and routine procedures exploded, and patients were forced to wait for hours, often in pain. Nurses who remained faced extreme burnout, working overtime to try and fill the impossible gaps. The quality of patient care declined, and a sense of crisis began to settle over the entire healthcare system. It was a national emergency that threatened the very foundation of what it meant to be Canadian. A promise of universal, high-quality care. By 2015, the Canadian government had no choice but to admit its failure. They launched a new, aggressive plan to fast-track the return of Filipino nurses, creating special visa programs and simplifying the immigration process. The doors were reopened, and the influx of skilled professionals began to stabilize the system. Today, if you walk into a hospital in major Canadian cities like Toronto, Vancouver, or Winnipeg and ask, who's keeping the system alive? The answer will be the same across the board. Filipinos. They are the indispensable force, the heart and the hands that ensure Canada's healthcare system continues to be a point of national pride. But Canada wasn't the only Western giant that tried to go without them. The United States, the most powerful country on earth, nearly broke its own system by pushing Filipinos out. And the consequences were just as shocking. 1. The United States. The United States prides itself on being number one in everything, especially in healthcare. But here's a dirty secret the system doesn't want you to know. American healthcare has been leaning on the dedication and expertise of Filipinos for decades. In fact, a staggering number of nurses, physical therapists, and medical technicians across the country are of Filipino descent. They are the quiet, tireless professionals who keep the system running, especially in its most demanding corner. In the early 2010, a new wave of visa restrictions blocked thousands of Filipinos from entering the US. The government, in its bureaucratic wisdom, thought, we'll let American nurses cover it. It was a massive and costly mistake. What followed was a full-blown healthcare disaster that rippled across the nation. Hospitals, already strained by a nursing shortage, collapsed under the pressure. Patients were neglected. Wait times for critical care stretched to the breaking point, and stories of overworked staff became a grim reality. The nurses who remained faced impossible shifts, burning out by the thousands and quitting the profession altogether. It was a vicious cycle of a collapsing system. By 2018, the crisis was undeniable. The US government had no choice but to change course. They were forced to reopen their doors, actively recruiting Filipinos again through fast-tracked visa programs and special incentives. The nation's healthcare leaders realized that a system built on reputation alone could not survive without the essential human capital that powered it. And today, the truth is clearer than ever. Now, in nearly every American hospital, from the bustling halls of Los Angeles to the emergency rooms of New York, Filipinos are the backbone. Their presence is so essential that without them, the entire American healthcare system simply doesn't work. This was a hard lesson learned, but it proves that even the most powerful nation in the world is deeply reliant on the skills and compassion of the Filipino people.